Last year I painted with only the hard round brush, and I got a pretty good results. Now I'm wondering how would it be to paint with only the soft round brush. So I gave it a shot. The big problem I was worried about was getting good edge control with a soft brush. I was worried that the edges were going to be too soft and I couldn't get a hard edge. Turns out that's not really a problem. When the brush is big, it will be difficult to get a hard edge, but if you make it smaller and smaller, you'll get a harder and harder looking edge. Alright, without further ado, I'm gonna talk through what I did. Alright, I start with a rough line drawing, and then I wanted to see what I could do with that, just as a base. And it turns out the soft round brush makes a really good line drawing brush. And now I'm going in and blocking in the light source, and trying to get an idea where the direction of the light's coming from, and figuring out just roughly what I want the colors to be. Trying out different colors than what I normally use, just to experiment a little bit. And I go in and I keep messing around with color throughout the whole painting. But I'm trying to keep the rock separated from the background, keeping it as more of the focal point and having it more sharper edges, and having the background have more of a softer edge to it. Just end up going in, touching up details, changing things. The rock, I spend the most time on painting a rock, because that's what I want you to look at. But I end up just working on it too much and like overdoing it and changing it, so it ends up looking a lot worse than I intended it to. And the background is just kind of looking flat to me, so I just keep trying to put in more details in the mountain, just to make it have more interesting parts to it. But I realize that's kind of defeating the purpose of having the background be kind of blurred out. I wanted it to be blurred out and not as detailed, because that's not what I want you to look at. That's not the focus of the painting. But I still work on that for a while. Eventually I'm going to just paint over this whole thing. But for now I'm just going to continue with this part. I tried to put like a little stream in. I decided that's not really what I want to do. I thought maybe like a mirage effect, just to simulate how hot it is, or kind of give you an idea of how hot it was. And it didn't really feel that hot based on the colors. It kind of felt cool to me, because a lot of the colors are kind of towards the gray end of things, not very saturated. But I'm going to make the decision to basically paint over everything in just a little bit, because I get tired of working on it and I don't really like how it looks. And honestly, looking back at it now, I don't think it was really that bad. But once I start painting over the mountain, I end up using the wrong brush. So I decided I would go back to my last save and start there, and then continue with the soft round brush. But this painting completely gets changed and painted over. I keep kind of the same light direction. I end up touching up the colors a bit. I try messing around with the curves and stuff, but that doesn't really do much for me. Then I started using the wrong brush. What a dummy. Alright, now I'm back on track with the soft round brush. And I'm just painting over pretty much everything. There's some little color variants that I leave behind, which can work really well, just having a base color underneath and then painting over and keeping what you like and changing it, kind of altering it. And that tends to be a big thing with environments, because you can make all kinds of changes, because there's a ton of different, millions of combinations of stuff you could do. So it just takes some time to paint landscapes and environments. But I'm really liking how this direction of the art's going, with kind of the pink sky, or pink mountains. The sky is kind of pink a little bit. Kind of more like a sunset type lighting. And I really like that out of this whole painting, probably one of the most. And I'm replacing that rock that I had in the foreground with a sword, because I think the sword tells a bit more of a story. I mean, I could have put a figure there, but I thought a sword would be kind of less boring than just always having a figure in the corner, like I do for some of my other paintings, which I haven't drawn very many figures in a while. So then I go through and I decide maybe the sword, instead of sticking in the ground, I could have it lean up against a rock. And it took me a while to figure out how to render the sword to make the lighting look accurate. I don't think I quite get it right, but I was pleased with it for the most part. And that was kind of a fun part of the painting, just kind of figuring out how to make the sword, how to construct it and which parts they do, and kind of alter it as I go. I do that for the whole painting, but the sword particularly was a fun part to play around with. I'm trying to make sure I keep the background blurry, but probably in the end I end up sharpening it too much, because I like the zoomed in section that I'm doing. I could even crop it and just have just the sword zoomed in on and the rest of it kind of blurry. I think that would add a really cool effect. I just keep working on this rock, which I do like some parts of it, but it just doesn't seem to be fitting well with the sword, and kind of the silhouette of it's kind of overwhelming the sword. So you can kind of tell there's a sword there, but not really. They don't really, the contrast between the rock and the sword isn't very obvious. It kind of looks almost the same color. Because that tends to be something with metallic and shiny objects. They tend to pick up the same colors of things. And I wanted to keep that accurate. But I guess I could have just changed the sword color or the rock color, but I don't know. It didn't seem right. So I'm trying to rest it up against these rocks again after I flip the canvas, just to get a fresh look on it. And I'm about to just remove this rock and just paint the sword in the ground. So I probably spent, I don't know, maybe a half hour to an hour on this rock, which is quite a bit of time. I think I spent most of the time on that rock, which is kind of funny to think about because I just remove it. And now I'm going through and just kind of rendering the foreground, doing some smaller rocks, not as big, because I just felt like it needed more details. Not necessarily, it didn't necessarily need more details. And I could have left the foreground less detailed, but I kind of got carried away with it. I was having quite a bit of fun just detailing it. End up putting in several more rocks, more cracks in the ground, especially near the sword is probably the most important part for the render. And I started playing around with the saturation and the hue, just to make it more interesting to look at. And sometimes that's a little trick you can do. You can just kind of mess around with the color slightly, and it immediately makes the painting more interesting, and you might not even realize some of that, but that's kind of a cool detail to pay attention to with art, because that's one of the coolest things with painting. You can mess with a color. You can get some really cool looking colors. I know with a photograph you can get some really nice photos, but with painting you can just kind of exaggerate or just embellish it a little bit. And it just adds so much more life into the image. And I think that's part of the reason I really like landscape painting, because you can just mess around with everything, but you can still give it that not realistic feel, but kind of a realistic feel. Like a semi-realism, because realism is just a pain. It takes forever to do, and I don't have the patience for that. But I still like having things look believable. They don't necessarily have to be realistic, but they have to look believable for me to really like it. And that's where value really comes in. Now I'm just doing a few final touches here and there. And yeah, I think this painting was pretty cool once I went in and recorrected it. I still think I might go in and touch it up. Maybe I'll probably try and just keep it to the soft rough brush if I go and finish it up. But it's mostly finished. I would say it's good enough. There's always more you can do with a painting. So I'm pretty happy with how this painting came out. A few things that I liked about it is that I had the background blurry and out of focus and made everything else zoomed in on the sword in the foreground, which made a really nice composition. I really liked the craggly parts of the rock, and I just had a fun time doing this painting. It wasn't so fun in the first half, but once I decided to change the painting and go with something completely different, I feel like it worked a lot better. And that's also another thing you should know, is just painting over stuff isn't the worst thing. Sometimes it might be worse, but if you're already considering painting over it, your painting's probably not that good. But until next time, Dargon out. You do not want to know how many times I had to reshoot that.